Hi guys, it's Mrs. Mills. I just want to talk to you a little bit about what DNA is and what it means to you and me and all living things here on. So DNA is an abbreviated name. DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. And DNA is the nucleic acid that's one of the four biomolecules that make up all living things in life, in organisms. Okay, so DNA is a strand of genetic information, or it gives the instructions for an organism's growth and function. Okay, so basically what that means is that the traits that you see in someone else or in a living thing is expressed through this genetic information. It gives the instructions or the code. We know, and as a review, DNA is found inside the nucleus of each cell. The interesting thing about DNA is that all of your cells have your entire genetic code. Okay, so that means our DNA is pretty cool because it can turn some of our genetic information on and some of it off. So, for example, in your skin cells are never going to produce enzymes to help you digest food. Those codes for muscle cells in the digestive system is turned off, and the codes that help your skin grow and function and develop are turned on in skin cells. That's why your skin cell is never going to turn into a muscle cell to digest food, or a muscle cell to create your heartbeat. So some of our genetic code is turned on and it's turned off. Okay, so what is DNA made of? Okay, DNA has the appearance of a twisted ladder. We call this a double helix. Okay, and this ladder is made of sugar and phosphate molecules, and the steps are made of four separate nitrogen bases. Our nitrogen bases are attached together because of nitrogen through a chemical reaction, and those four nitrogen bases are adenine, guanine, cytosine, and thymine. Okay, and to pair up, there are only two of them that pair together. So adenine always pairs with thymine, and cytosine always pairs with guanine. How can you remember this? Well, first of all, you don't have to. This isn't something I'm going to have a test or anything over for you. It's just basic information so you know. How do you remember that adenine pairs with thymine? Well, I remember it because I think of apples are on the tree. A and T for apples and tree. Okay, cytosine always pairs with guanine, and how I remember that is that cytosine, or C for cars are in the garage. C and G will always pair together. And that's what makes up the steps of the base as it twists around the top. Okay, so what information is given on the DNA strands that we have? Well, we've talked about chromosomes when we talked about asexual reproduction and mitosis. Okay, so if you look at this picture here, you see that there are color codes, and this one is a tiny bit darker, but I think it's because in the picture it's shadowed. These color codes are what we call alleles. One allele comes from your mother, and one of the alleles come from the father for the living organism. Okay, and those alleles, depending on what they are how we get the traits that make us up. Okay, so those alleles determine whether we're going to be blondes or brunettes. It's going to determine what color our eyes are. It's going to determine how tall we are. It's going to determine our height. All of those things are coded in our information in our DNA. Okay, and this is how we get our inherited characteristics. So how does DNA work for cells? Okay, so obviously it has to go through cell division. Okay, cell division for sexual and asexual reproduction are quite different, and you'll learn about sexual reproduction cell division next week. Okay, but when the cell divides, it divides those chromosomes also, and it splits it into two. And so either in mitosis we have two identical cells, or in meiosis we actually, our end result are four separate cells that are not alike. Okay, this process is very important because it instructs the cells on their daily activities or their jobs that they have to do to keep that organism living. And remember that every cell in our body goes through cell division. There isn't a single cell in our body that does not divide. Now, dependent upon the cell, remember the amount of time it takes for cells to divide are different. So your bone cells divide at a much slower rate than your skin cells do. Okay, so each type of cell does have a different amount of time it takes for it to divide and to create more. So how do we know that DNA exists? Well, we can look back in our research on scientists and we can pinpoint this to 3 scientists. The first one we're going to talk about is a woman. Her name is Rosalind Franklin. And in 1952, she worked with 2 males in a laboratory in England. And she really is the person who discovered DNA. So she discovered that by taking an X-ray of some DNA strands, which she didn't know were DNA, she found that there are 2 chains of molecules that were in a spiral form. So basically, by taking the DNA, she discovered that DNA looks like a double helix. It looks like a twisted ladder. Now, because of her work, the 2 gentlemen she worked with, named James Watson and Francis Crick, made the first model of DNA, which they termed the double helix. And eventually, the 2 gentlemen were awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. Now, the Nobel Peace Prize is a pretty prestigious award, and even at that time, it was pretty prestigious. If you don't know about the Nobel Peace Prize, it's named after Alfred Nobel, and he came up with the Nobel Peace Prize because he discovered dynamite, and he became an instant billionaire. And because dynamite was so devastating and destructive, he wanted to do something positive for the world, and so he set up a fund for the Nobel Peace Prize. But it was kind of a scandal at the time when James Watson and Francis Crick won the Nobel Peace Prize because they didn't mention any of the work that Rosalind Franklin did before them. They didn't give her any credit for the discovery of the phosphate molecules on the sides and the nitrogen bases in the middle for the twisted ladder look, or what we call now the double helix. Okay, and that devastated her quite a bit because she worked with these gentlemen for many years. But James and Francis were given recognition for the discovery. So all in all, without our genetic code in our DNA, nothing would exist. Life would not be able to create life. Or you could look at it at a different perspective and everyone would look exactly the same. Okay? There would be no gender differences. There would only be maybe really short, super skinny, or super fat people, and it would be impossible to reproduce. So it is very, very important to remember that the only reason why we're able to reproduce is because of the fact that DNA exists in our cells and our nucleuses and divides, and we share inherited characteristics from our parents, and those characteristics move on through your genetic makeup. When people have children or offspring, that genetic code is then spread onto them. Okay, have a good night.